Wow. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Aluminum Repairs, Effects on the Collision Repair Process. This webinar is sponsored by the Paint Bonding Equipment Specialist segment of the Auto Care Association, which many of you may know formerly as AAIA, but they are now the Auto Care Association. My name is Chris Johnson. I'm the Managing Partner of Aftermarket Partners. I've been in the business for over 20 years in the distribution and collision side. I'm proud to be your moderator today as we have a great presentation. And I guess why is PBES segment sponsoring this webinar? The webinar supports our mission to provide membership value through programs and resources, help distribution adapt to change in regulations, business practices, and technology, which this is very appropriate. PBES members enjoy many benefits, including up-to-date information on industry trends, issues, easy access to suppliers, new technology, etc. Today our presenter is Erik Spitznagel. He's the CEO of Dent Equipment. Erik is a wealth of knowledge. I think you'll enjoy this. But as a brief overview, aluminum is becoming a much wider used material in the automotive industry. It's used to lighten the load and to account for making the engine smaller due to government regulations, miles per gallon, and other mandates. Since aluminum use, particularly in panels, is being used increasingly by OEM, soon repair and body shops will need to be able to do basic repairs on aluminum panels like they never have before. Today, Erik will provide a brief review of what is occurring within the industry, describe the benefits, positive, negatives of aluminum usage. He will also outline the repair procedure, shop requirements, and education necessary to understand this change in aluminum repair. You will learn how the aluminum usage is bringing change to the repair process as well as to the collision shop today. So at the end of the presentation, we're going to field questions. This is the second of our two presentations today, and we found from the last one that we had a couple of dozen questions. So I would ask that as we get through into the presentation that you send us the questions through the messaging unit on the bottom right of the GoToMeeting control panel. I will present them to Erik, and we'll get through them as fast as we can at the end. But to save you the problem of having to write all this down, this will also be posted, this whole presentation will be posted online at Auto Care Association website by next Tuesday for anybody to access. So we're going to try and allow 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions, but in case we don't get them all, we will definitely answer them back to you. So with that, I'll hand it to Erik. Erik, thanks for joining us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and I'd like to thank the Auto Care Association for providing this venue for us to have a small discussion on aluminum repair and what it's bringing for the changes it's bringing to our industry. So welcome everyone from across the country, and I know we have some customers or people in Canada coming in as well. So aluminum repair, it's a big change for our industry, and it's all being brought on by the real paradigm shift is with the introduction of the Ford F-150 from Ford. There have been aluminum panels around for many years. Since the 1930s, aluminum has been used in vehicle panels. But it's really, the shift is really happening with this introduction of the F-150 in October of this year. An example of why it is such a big change for our industry is the F-150 is the #1 selling vehicle within the United States. There were 763,000 vehicles, F-150s, sold last year. That translates to 63,000 per month, 14,600 per week, 2,100 per day, 90 every minute. So as you can imagine, that's quite a few vehicles. The amount of aluminum panels that are produced by Ford for the F-150 every month equal all of last year's production of aluminum panels for every other vehicle combined. So you're going to see 1 year's worth of aluminum panel vehicles on the road the first month that Ford introduces this vehicle. So let's extrapolate that out. 6 months later, 6 years worth of aluminum vehicles. 12 months later, 12 years worth of aluminum panel vehicles on the road. And some of those are going to get into collisions and end up in our customers' bays for repair. So it's a situation that can't be ignored, that the shops need to prepare for, and we're going to review a little bit of the workability of aluminum, so you guys have a general idea to help your customers, work through the process. But also we're going to review some of the general pieces of equipment, whether they be my own or some other manufacturer's equipment, just so you can provide the best knowledge to your customer base as to what's going to be required for them. So at the end of the day, we're going to have a bit of education that's going to allow us to help our customers out, work their way through this process of aluminum repair and get them prepped and ready. Okay, so why are we changing to aluminum? Why are car manufacturers changing to aluminum? Well, it's federally mandated in a lot of cases, as with a lot of things in many industries. The CAF standards for EPA requirements for miles per gallon are changing. By 2016, we're going to need to have 35.5 miles per gallon on the industry average. By 2025, that mileage average goes up to 54.5 miles per gallon. You can't do that just by making engines more efficient. The cars need to be made lighter, and they're doing that through many processes. We've seen the introduction of boron or ultra high strength steel, Volvo introducing that first in 2006, but now becoming integral part of all new car manufacture for structurally significant areas, that ultra high strength steel. They're using more carbon fiber. They're starting to use magnesium panels. And of course, the aluminum panels that we're here to talk about today, which is why Ford has added these panels to their F-150. Since it's their #1 selling vehicle, you can imagine that by increasing the fuel mileage on this one vehicle, it will change their fleet-wide average for the better. And the EPA estimates that for every 100 pounds saved on a vehicle, there's a 2% mile per gallon increase. And for the F-150, that makes a big difference again on their average fleet fuel economy. And it's actually more than every hybrid the company currently sells. So that's sort of why they're going to aluminum panels. The manufacturers, in this case Ford, are prepping their dealer shops because, of course, they're going to need to be able to fix these cars when they get out on the road. But this is also going to be needed for basically every body shop across the country is going to need to have specialized equipment for aluminum repair. Gone are the days where they say they don't do specific vehicles, that they send them up to the shop down the road. Gone are the days, or very shortly will be gone the days where they just replace the panel because shops are going to have the equipment. The insurance companies are going to start saying that they need to fix them rather than replace them. Few shops are currently set up for these repairs, but with the proper guidance and proper budgets and the ability of the shop to actually have the space to do it, there's tremendous growth opportunities for the shops themselves in gaining more business and having it directed to them, but also for us as distributors to be the ones that educate them first and then provide them with the equipment afterwards. So here's a slide that says not only is it the F-150 with their massive amounts of vehicles going to be put out on the road in October. Remember, it's October, so we have time to prepare. And remember, it's 2,000 a week, so it's going to build slowly, but it will build. And actually, it's not too slowly, it's pretty quickly. This year, the Mercedes C-Class and the S-Class are all aluminum paneled. And then you have your other manufacturers with what would be called more exotic because they're less quantity, your Teslas, your Land Rovers, your Audis, and your Jaguars. These are all vehicles that may be going to specialized shops today, but because Ford is such a massive player in the automotive repair industry by the amount of vehicles that they put out, all the shops across the country that equip themselves with the proper equipment will be able to start taking these vehicles on as well. And of course, as we all know, which is why we've signed up for this webinar, to educate ourselves. You guys are in the forefront of it, and kudos to you all. But it is out there in the media. You know, everything from the Wall Street Journal to our own industry publications are telling us that it's here, it's on its way, and as shown in the Detroit News here, aluminum vehicles will reshape the repair industry. It is a game changer. So to learn a little bit about aluminum and what's needed for the repair of it, aluminum, of course, is different than steel. It reacts differently. It requires specialized pieces of equipment, and it requires a specific repair procedure. Nothing too difficult. It's nothing to be afraid of. But, you know, charts like this kind of scare people off. Oh, it's an alloy. What alloy is it? Aluminum is a soft material, so it does need to be alloyed with something to make it usable in the automotive industry. In the automotive industry for panels, which we're mostly talking about here, the 5000 and the 6000 series are what's being used. The series is what it's alloyed with, magnesium or magnesium silicone, as you see. The T here is for tempering, and this is used to identify the process that's used in hardening the material. So it can be used tempering by stamping it, or also there's heat treating also that's been done to make the material even harder. Aluminum being a soft material, when it's stamped into the shape of a fender, it becomes hard. When it gets into a collision, it becomes harder yet. And if you try and pull that material out without softening it first, you can put a crack or a break in it. All right? So the material itself, when working with it, you need to soften it. Softening it with heat. The temperature range for heating up a panel is between 400 and 600 degrees. And it's a very specific temperature range, that 400 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Below 400 degrees, the material doesn't soften. Above 600 degrees, you start getting into a range where the material, aluminum, will permanently anneal or soften, all right, which is where you can't put the work tempering or hardening back into it. So once we've softened it, now we can start pulling on the aluminum. We're talking about dent repair here, and this is all part of the equipment that's surrounding. But when it comes down to it, what do body shops do? They fix dings, dents, creases, and frame damage in the vehicle. So we're talking about dent repair. All other equipment is basically ancillary to this damage repair. So you have to soften it in order to pull it. But work-hardened material means that you can soften it with heat. It remains soft or softened even if the temperature goes back to room temperature, because you need to put the work energy back into it to harden it up. So when you're working with a large damaged area, you heat it up to soften it. As you start pulling it out, you start feeling some of the rigidity or stiffness come back into the material. If it becomes too hard again to start pulling, you may need to re-soften it again and continue pulling it out. Inversely, if it's a shallow damage or shallow damaged area, and you heat it up and you pull it out, but you don't put enough work energy in it to start feeling that rigidity come back, then you need to continue to bounce it back and forth, which is why some of the equipment out there has squeeze pulling ability or bouncing ability where you massage the damage out. And I like to liken it to a spoon. When you bend a spoon back and forth, if you bend it back and forth too many times, it will crack and break. If you heat it, you're able to bend it back and forth more. But then again, you'll eventually feel that hardening come back. Okay, so that's the heatability and the pulling of the aluminum. The aluminum oxide. Aluminum oxide is a corrosion that occurs on aluminum with, or not a corrosion, a rust that occurs on the aluminum. It can happen within 15 minutes depending on atmospheric conditions. This oxide will change the aluminum from a very shiny material, freshly ground, to a more dull, muted look on it. The oxide in itself is not damaging to the aluminum, but it does have a much higher melting point than regular aluminum. So Aluminum melts at 1100 degrees. The oxide will melt at 1700 degrees. So in order to successfully fuse a stud onto the panel, that oxide will need to be cleaned off. And we use stainless steel brushes in order to take that oxide off and to get a successful weld of a stud. So we have different temperature ranges in the material. 400 to 600 degrees to bring it up to soften it, not under and not over, because we have different issues that apply. And then you don't want to exceed 1100 degrees because you'll melt the aluminum. Now aluminum will not show any reddening when it gets up to the melting point like steel would. It will just give a white puff of smoke and you'll have a hole in it, which is why we like to use a heat gun with a digital set temperature range on it, which makes it much easier to monitor the temperature range that you're bringing the aluminum up to. But you have to keep in mind that aluminum also spreads the heat very rapidly. It's a very good conductor, which is why when you work with the aluminum to put a stud on it, you can't just grab one of the regular stud welders that are already sitting in the shop, load an aluminum pin into it, and weld it onto the panel. It doesn't generate heat fast enough. That's why you need a capacitor discharge stud welder that will build up the energy and fuse the stud on using direct current once you pull the trigger. So that's another thing that you need to know. So it's a work-hardened material. You need to soften it to pull it. It forms an oxide. In order to stud weld on it, you need to remove the oxide. The next item here is galvanic corrosion. This is the most important thing of this webinar or working with aluminum repair, is this galvanic corrosion. This is a corrosion that happens on the aluminum when it's in the presence of steel. Scientifically, it's a less noble metal giving of itself to a more noble metal. But what happens is the aluminum will start corroding in the presence of steel particles, steel dust, that kind of thing. And the corrosion that happens very quickly. It can happen in a week or so, or even less time, and it won't cause the fender itself to fall off the vehicle, but it will cause an issue with your finish, your paint on the vehicle, and you'll have a callback and have to refinish it. So you need to isolate your area to prevent this cross-contamination of dust throughout the shop, and you also need to isolate your set of tools. Isolation is one of the key components to aluminum repair. You need an isolated area, you need isolated tool sets, and you need to know, of course, the workability of the aluminum. Now, you can use steel dollies and steel hammers on aluminum. You just have to make sure that they were never used on steel itself, the regular steel panels. Steel to steel, there's crossing of material back and forth, depending on the carbon rating of the steel, which one gives to the other. But because steel is harder than aluminum, the steel dollies or hammers will not give of themselves to the aluminum panel. So there you'll only get a little bit of aluminum put back on the hammer or dolly, which can be cleaned off relatively easy. But if you do you need to maintain the integrity of them. If you get a nick or a scratch in your aluminum or in your steel hammer or dolly, you need to polish it out using a polishing wheel. How do you identify aluminum panels? Well, in a lot of instances, it's just going to be common knowledge. But one foolproof method, of course, is to put a magnet against the panel. If it doesn't stick, it's probably aluminum, right? Otherwise, if someone's bondoed it up and you don't know what's underneath it. Databases, of course, from the manufacturers, and again, common industry knowledge. What you can do to help.
Eric, can I interrupt you? Eric, I need to interrupt you just for a second. To everybody listening, remember we're taking questions at the end of this segment, which is about 15, 20 minutes away. So please, if you have a question, begin to formulate that and submit it through the chat session, and Eric will answer at the end. Thanks, Eric.
And thank you for the reminder on the time. Time does pass very quickly. Okay, what you can do to help your customers? Well, you're doing it now. You're educating yourself. Of course, further education is always helpful, and you can find a lot of that on the internet. And then the next slide will show some ICAR training available also. But educating yourself so that you're able to walk your customers through this and keep them, informed will help you and help your customer. Help you by attracting business to yourself, and help your customer by allowing more cars to be channeled through to them, making them more profitable in the end. You have to go in and evaluate the shop. Do they have room to create an isolated area? Do they have some equipment that can be transferred back and forth, like an aluminum welder, a MIG welder, that can be transferred back and forth across the shop? But things like just regular screwdrivers or grinding tools and what have you, you're not going to grab a grinder from a steel area and bring it into your isolated aluminum repair area and then start using it. Even if you have the forethought to take off the grinding paper and put a new piece of grinding paper on, the problem is you have to decontaminate the whole tool. You grab a hold of the tool with your hands and it's got steel dust on it. You put your hand on the aluminum panel and you put the steel dust on it, then you take a hammer to it and you drive in that steel dust. Now you have that galvanic corrosion issue. So they're going to need the most common everyday pieces of equipment they're going to need to keep in a certain area. Training. Which guys are going to get trained? There's going to be a specific cadre of technicians that are going to have this higher education, and they're going to start working on this aluminum. And once it gets out there, again, once all these Fords are out there, 763,000 of them in the next year, 1 year's worth of these cars every month, as based on last year's sales of aluminum, you're going to get these guys and they're going to be working full time. Ford estimates the cost to upgrade a shop to aluminum repair between $30,000 and $50,000. That will be dependent upon how much equipment they already have, how much infrastructure they need to put in to create an isolated area. And so that's where your evaluation comes in and your education. The education that's provided right now out there, you would think that the manufacturers themselves would be, more on top of this. That's not entirely true. As we have found across the bay, they do have certain equipment that they like to see out there, but we're finding that they're moving away from identifying just a particular brand and saying more a type of equipment, such as a pulse MIG welder for aluminum or a stud welding system created just for aluminum repair. So the technicians and also some of your key salespeople, you might like to take an aluminum repair class from ICAR. Ford has worked together with ICAR for the last 2 years developing a training program specific to the F-150. It's going to be available to the entire industry sometime late this summer or early in the fall. Okay? Now it's going to open up early for Ford dealership associated body shops. But for everyone else, for the industry, late summer or early fall, which is well in time in order to get ready for the October introduction of the F-150. This is going to be a 6-hour comprehensive course that deals with general aluminum repair, the alloy identification that we showed a chart of very quickly there, welding requirements, the different types of rivets that are used on aluminum repair. This F-150 is not only a game changer in the aluminum panels and the quantity of aluminum panels that they're going to be putting out there, but also in the way the car or the vehicle is put together itself. It's fastened together with what's known as self-piercing rivets. These are rivets that are pushed into the panel with a die on the backside so that these rivets actually never penetrate all the way through the other side. And the die helps the rivet form on the inside of the panel to spread out and hold the panel together. There are very few spot welds on this new F-150. It is all put together with self-piercing rivets. So Ford has mandated that there are some very specific tools or types of equipment that are needed, and then there are some optional pieces. And so here's somewhat of a list. You have your pulse MIG welder for welding cracks back up if the damage is already taken through the panel too much and you need to weld a crack. A dedicated aluminum dent extractor, which is a stud welder, and then, of course, a heat gun to bring it up to temperature, a pyrometer, which is an infrared heat gun in order to measure the temperature. Now, if you use a heat gun that has a digital temperature set on it, on the back panel, then you're able to control that using that because it is a general area of temperature that you need to get through, again, 400 to 600 degrees. And if anyone ever reads the instruction sheet on an infrared thermometer, please note that it does not work on reflective surfaces. So you'll need to put like a magic marker or something like that to get a proper heat rating on it. Dust extraction. Aluminum dust, when combined with steel dust or in great enough quantities, can be explosive. So they want you, when you're grinding it, to extract the dust away with a wet mix system in order to suppress any explosiveness and to keep the dust tamped down. The specialized riveter, self-piercing riveter, and the work separation area. Again, isolate, isolate, isolate. These are the keys to creating an aluminum dedicated area. And it can be as simple as with a room curtain, or it can be with a built-out area. It depends on the shop, how much room they have. You can also use the vinyl curtains, but you can also use an unused spray booth if that's available, if they've upgraded one over time. This is our system that we're offering. It's a Ford-approved system, our aluminum repair station. But this gives you somewhat of an idea. You have this stud welder in there in the blue box here, the stud gun, and I'll have a better picture later on. But Ford has a whole program of equipment that is that they're recommending out there. You can do use spray booths if you really want to spread the if you want to spend a lot of money, or you can start utilizing curtain walls. These ones have more of a rigid side on them, or you have this one. This is the most basic setup. This runs around $2,000 to create an isolated area. Then you start moving up and you have an area with lighting above it, as you see here, and then you have lighting and air filtration as well. So this is one of the simplest and easiest ways of setting up your isolated area. These are some very specific pieces of equipment, pulse MIG welders for welding the aluminum panels from 2 different manufacturers. You have on either side here, these are what are known as the self-piercing rivet guns. These put in those rivets into the panel, and you can see there's the C-clamp with the die. And there are several different kinds of dies depending on which manufacturer is using which manufacturer's vehicle we're working on. And these are all battery-operated hydraulic units. Now, this gives you an idea of how expensive some of this equipment is. These self-piercing riveters, the shop price on them is approximately $8,000. Okay, we're looking at $8,000 to $10,000 for these type of welders, depending on the accessories that you add on in the accessory package. This is a fume extractor arm. This is going one above dust extraction. This is also extracting fumes in the area. It's usually an option on these kind of things, but this kind of system runs around $2,500 as well. Prepping the shops. We have seen here at DentFix an extraordinary demand. From the day the Detroit Automotive Show announced, or Ford announced at the Detroit Automotive Show that the F-150 was going to be aluminum panel, that day we started receiving phone calls. We have sold more aluminum, and this is, this is great for all of us along the way. We've sold more aluminum stud welders than we have in the last 7 years. All right, and this is, or 7 years worth of sales, and this is based on last year's sales, which were pretty good. Every manufacturer is trying to keep up with the excessive demand and of these units, so they're hard to come by. But there is no need to panic. Okay, nothing has changed today that wasn't here last year, other than the foreknowledge that this wave of repairs is coming. So it's important to get your customers prepared, get them in line with their training, and have the equipment starting to come on its way, so that when it does happen, that they are comfortable and prepared. But the thing is, nobody needs something yesterday or today if they're still doing the same amount of work. You can still replace a hood on a Ford F-150, bolt on and bolt off. It's the same process as was happening before. But if you walked into a shop today and you told them to put down all their regular steel stud welders and their hammers and dollies, that they're not fixing any creases or damage to panels, and that you're just replacing them, they'd look at you like you were crazy. Well, with the amount of aluminum panels that are coming out, you can't just replace them anymore. You're going to have to start fixing them. But that brings to another point. If, let's say in the example of a hood, if it's totally crumpled, you're going to replace it. It's as simple as that. But it's up to the technician to analyze the damage and see whether it's more efficient to repair or replace. But if a crease runs down the side of a vehicle, you're not going to replace the fender, the door skins, all the way back to the rear quarter panel. You're going to start pulling the damage out because it's just not feasible and it's not cost effective. So you're going to start to see insurance companies directing repairs to shops that have the proper equipment. This is a win for shops that are prepared and have it, because they can start getting this business directed to them. And it's a win for distributors because we can work hand in hand with our customers, helping them accommodate this this repair need that they're going to have. So educating yourselves, getting your customers educated, and then start, analyzing what they need and getting them prepared is something that's very important. You guys can start getting yourselves educated with some of these sites here and learning about the equipment. We have several articles written on our website. There are also other companies out there that have written articles. Start gathering the information that you see. All these screens that you see right now are going to be posted later on the AutoCare website, and you can pull this information. Of course, you can always contact us at dentfix.com or through our phone numbers, and we can discuss things together. I'm happy to fill you in with information in general repair. It's one of those things where we all work together. So this is a tremendous opportunity for everyone. Education is the key. Getting everyone educated and getting them prepared is something that's going to it's going to be great for the industry. It's going to be great for all of us because it's a way of showing you guys that you're working with your customer, and you're the first ones to do it. There are going to be a lot of companies out there with their heads in the sand, and they're going to get overwhelmed by this. Get out there and distinguish yourselves from your competitors. I'd like to
Eric, before you jump to the next slide, I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, throw them out now. We're going to go to that in about 5 minutes. So just want to make sure that you have the chance to get them in if you want to submit them. So sorry, Eric, keep going.
No, it's okay. I'm done. I may have wound myself down a little earlier than the last one.
No, you have another picture here.
I do, right here. So let's start taking some questions. This is our aluminum repair station that's offered by DentFix. It's the capacitor discharge welder that's here that fuses the stud on, as you see here, and here's the fusion process happening. And our unit is unique in that it has the ground located on either side of the gun. This grounding allows you to work in a centralized area in the panel and just blend within the same panel as opposed to attaching separate ground cables. You can see we have an entirely isolated set of highly polished steel hammers and dollies, some nylon shaping tools. We use a body file with open teeth because aluminum is a softer material. It would clog up a finer teeth. And that body file is used to take off what's left of the head if you clip it off, but also to see where the high and the low in the panel is. Here's your stainless steel brush for taking off that oxide. We have quick pull release fingers, so it's very quick and easy to take them on and off. And you can see this unit in action on our website. We have videos of it. Here, this whole system, the way it's set up, the alu spot, it's from start to finish. It indicates what you need to do in aluminum repair. It's an isolation system. Everything is isolated within the tool cart itself. The tools close up at the end of the day so that you don't have them wandering through the shop. You have your different pullers. This is a leverage puller back here. This is a bridge puller for pulling out larger creases. Notice this lever. This is for massaging action. This goes back to, again, the tempering or the hardening of the aluminum. Once you've softened it, you have to put the work energy into it. So if we're working with a shallow area, we have the ability to bounce out or massage out the damage, plus also put the work hardening in here. We are Ford approved. It is one of the part numbers that is approved for Ford repair. And then this locks the whole thing up. This is the isolation dust cover that allows you to keep the unit clean and totally out of the way for use on the next job. All right. Again, thank you all for coming. We will be taking questions now and also answering any excessive questions via email. And you're always welcome to call us up or email us directly as well.
Okay, Eric, I got a 3-part question for you, so I'm going to make you think after doing this presentation. So these are all related. So how does the whole dent area need to be brought up in temperature in order to work the area? If so, how do you measure that temperature of the aluminum before repairing? And what is your recommendation of a heat gun to use for this application?
Okay, you're going to ask one part at a time. Okay, so with the heating up the area, if you're, again, the technicians the repair technician's experience it will be key in all of this, right? And as they work the material, they'll learn how it reacts a little bit more. But the same thing applies to steel repair in a lot of instances. You work the dent out the way it was put in. Now, if you have a large area that you're going to be pulling up and other areas of it are pulling up with it as well, then you're going to need to soften that whole area. Now, heating it up with the heat gun, remember, it doesn't need to remain at that 400 to 600 degree temperature range because it's a work-hardened material. So once we bring it up to soften it, you can let it cool down, and then once you start pulling it, it starts becoming more rigid and hardening up. But you do any area of movement that's going to be happening in the aluminum that when you're pulling out, you do want it to be softened. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting it too much. And if it is a large area of movement, you have the possibility of putting a crack in it. So you do want to heat it up. Now, how do you heat it up? Okay, well, again, remember, aluminum melts at 1100 degrees. If the technician is not paying attention and he uses a torch, he can easily exceed that and put a hole into it by melting it. So we do recommend using a heat gun. And I have mentioned the digital set temperature one with the temperature range on the back. Currently, the only one I know of is provided by Wagner. That does come with our aluminum repair station. And so from start to finish, this system that you see up here, it has that heat gun, it has the pulling devices, but if you want to provide it as a separate one, the gun that we're providing is a Wagner heat gun. That Wagner heat gun has temperature ranges from 450 to 550 and 650 to 750. Those are the ranges that we're going to use. So when you're heating up a very small area, 450 to 550, because you're concentrating that heat. But remember, aluminum absorbs or spreads heat very rapidly. So you're not going to get up to that 550. You're probably going to be somewhere between 450 and 550. Now, if I'm working a more general or broad area, even though I tell you not to exceed 600 degrees, bring the temperature range up to 650 to 750 on that heat gun, because you're moving it back and forth. And again, it's spreading the heat so quickly that you need that extra temperature in there to actually bring it up to the temperature range. And that brings us back to the welder itself, which is a capacitor discharge welder. What happens is the capacitors in here hold on to the energy, and when it releases the energy, it does it through direct current, which fuses the stud on. Literally, right after you pull the gun away, you could put your finger at the weld point, and there would be no heat. And also that applies to the back side of the panel as well. There is no penetration. You're not going through any E-coat either, because the heat is dissipated so quickly. Okay, second question.
Okay, we got another couple of questions here. What will the repair time differences look like with the new aluminum repair process?
Okay, the time differences, well, I guess that's a varied question because it depends on the skill level and the equipment of the technician, of what they're provided. So the time should be no more than pulling out regular steel. Again, it's not rocket science here. Okay, we're still welding studs onto car panels, and we're still pulling on those studs. The major differences are this isolation due to the galvanic corrosion and the heating of the panel in order to soften it. So isolating the system, once that's set up, that doesn't take any extra time because you have your tools set up. Heating the panel, that's a little extra time, but it's not very significant time. And so the time is not going to be much different. Now, the true question is the cost, and am I being compensated for it? That might deal with your next question here, because a lot of people say, am I getting paid more for this type of work? I'm investing all this money in the equipment today. Am I getting paid more? And that is a case-by-case basis, a region-by-region basis, an insurance adjuster by insurance adjuster, and company basis also. Education is the key. Educating the front office personnel into all that's required and the investment that's made, and the skill level, the training, the extra training for the technician. Because I imagine that a more highly trained technician is going to make a higher hourly wage. So asking your insurance agent or adjuster for a higher wage is not unreasonable. But of course, the agent himself or adjuster himself will need to be educated into all that's involved in it. And that's a negotiation that takes place on the street and then also is sometimes corporate policy dictated. We do find many places get higher labor rates. Now also the shop needs to do an analysis. Not only do they look at whether they need to repair or replace the panel, which is more efficient and cost effective, but they'll also need to look at, hey, I'm getting a certain profit on this part, but I'm making more money on labor for repair than I am on replacement. So there's a give and take situation here where, and nowadays we're seeing with these parts programs put into place with some of these insurance companies, they're limiting the profitability on parts for shops. So where can the shop make up the money also in profitability, and that will be in labor. And so there's a little give and take back and forth. Does this pay for itself? It's not going to pay for itself the first day. We're going to have to amortize it over a certain time period. And
yeah, Eric, we got some great questions coming in, so I got to start throwing them at you. This is kind of a lead-in, but Ford obviously has a lot of specialized tools available on Rotunda for opening rope, hem flange on the door skins, and for crimping the flange on the new skin. Can you talk a little bit about these versions of aftermarket tools available, as the Ford ones are so expensive?
Well, with a lot of companies, because we've seen it in a situation before where one particular brand of equipment is recommended, and that's the only one you have to get it to be certified, and thus there's a premium added to that piece of equipment. That's not so the case nowadays. Well, at least with the Ford program, they're recommending a certain type of equipment and certain brands that are out there now that they've looked at, but you have the option of buying other brands in a lot of situations. Now, as to the crimping tools and things like that, a lot of these tools that are being used, and I know there's a Rotunda collision kit with, which is basically a toolbox with several drawers underneath it with some very specific pieces of equipment, like a file belt sander, abrasive sanding belts, door hemming chisel closer, crimping tools, door hem flange tool, air power riveter for blind and hemlock rivets, different things like this, 7-piece body and fender repair set with fiberglass handles. It's like our aluminum nylon dolly sets that we have, or our rubberized dollies. These kind of things are all included in a particular set that's cobbled together by a supplier to the Ford Rotunda program. The crimping tools that we're talking about and why they're expensive is because they're coming from the aircraft industry. And these are the ones that they're recommending and utilizing. And they're coming from the aircraft industry, and they're just more expensive just because of the low volume of them and the specificity.
But they are available. Are they available on the aftermarket side?
They are available. They're specific brands. The system was put together by one particular distributor, and so I'm not aware of each and individual brand names of each and every crimping tool, but they are available in the general industry. Some research will need to be done to find those. Okay.
We've got a couple of process questions that are kind of interesting. What are you recommending for a blow-through area when welding a stud if such an incident would happen?
What am I? I see. If you blow a hole in the panel when welding. Okay. Right. Well, that has to do with the setting on the tool. If you're blowing a hole in it, your setting over here is too high. These welding units that are used in manufacturing industries, and since we're utilizing, and plus there are different thicknesses of panels out there. So in the previous session, we had someone questioning like truck bodies and things like that. Their steel will be thicker than their aluminum panels will be thicker than the typical panel that's used in a car body. So you may like to increase the amperage that's shown here, or the settings that are created here. We actually, when used on car panels, we're using the middle settings. So there are 2 settings higher amperage-wise and 2 settings below. If your settings are too high, you'll blow a hole in it. The ways of fixing that are you can take another stud and weld it across it and fix it that way. Then you clip it and file it down. But if you've used way too excessive a thing, then you're going to have to take one of those aluminum MIG welders and weld a little bead in there and then file that down. Okay,
kind of related but slightly different. If you have a dent in the aluminum and it becomes stretched during the repair, how do you reduce that what you might call extra aluminum or that stretch? How do you reduce it?
You cannot shrink aluminum. Again, it's a softer material, so when working it, you have to be careful. You cannot use hammer on dolly techniques. You have to use hammer off dolly technique, which is where it's simply not putting a dolly directly underneath a hammer strike or a hammer blow, because you can stretch out the aluminum material. I was just describing this to someone the other day. With steel, you heat it up and you rapidly cool it down and it tightens up. With aluminum, you can't necessarily do that. If you have a small area of stretch, you can reduce it, but if you ruin it, you can't fix it. And so if you're working on and that's if it's in the center. I describe it as actually like if you put a decal on a car and you have a bubble in it, you can work that bubble to the side and then release the air out. And in some situation, and again, I'm not a repair technician, but in some, I've seen people move large, massive, on customized cars, massive amounts of aluminum. And what they're doing is they're moving the stretch to the outer edge of the panel, and then the material is taken up out there. So you're stretching it out to the edge. But once it's in the center, and if you can't stretch it to the edge, then it's in there permanently.
Okay, I guess we're down to two last questions here. They're both related to tools. Can a heat lamp be used for larger repair areas to heat it up?
In a hugely generalized area, I suppose it could, but you have to bring the aluminum panel up to 400 degrees. I guess the question is, I don't sell heat lamps. Does the heat lamp get the material up to 400 degrees?
Okay, last question. This is the same as the last one. Can you confirm that the hammers and dollies, files, etc. that you're using today on steel cannot be used on aluminum? You have to have a different set of tools.
You have to have isolate your tools. You have to have a different set of tools. If you can use steel hammers and dollies on aluminum. Again, aluminum is softer than steel. The steel will not give of itself into the aluminum panel. But if you use that steel dolly on a steel skin, what happens is the fibers from the damaged skin will start impregnating themselves on the dolly, and then you take it over to an aluminum panel, and they'll start releasing themselves and being driven into the aluminum panel, causing that corrosion process to take place below the surface. You couldn't wipe it off. You'd have to do a severe amount of grinding. So if I accidentally hit a steel dolly against a steel panel because I wasn't paying attention, does it ruin it? No, because you can take it to a polishing wheel and polish it down, or simply wipe it down if it was a light hit or something like that. But if you've been using it over a course of time, then at that point you buy a new set of tools. I mean, it's just a cost that you're going to have to utilize. But you will not be able to use tools back and forth.
Okay, we have one last question, and then we'll draw this to a close. Can a shop TIG weld if they have that equipment?
Can they TIG weld the panel? Yes, they can.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eric, for a great presentation. Actually, you answered a lot of questions that previously were brought up afterwards, so that was great. Thank you, everybody who attended today's webinar, for all your questions, for your participation. We really appreciate it. This is a record turnout for a PBES webinar education series. I'm sure Eric's examples provided you with some ideas to implement in your business and or assist your customers, and if nothing else, is extremely valuable information about the aluminum repair changes coming. Again, this presentation will be posted on the Auto Care Association website for all to access by next Tuesday, May 27th. And an email will be sent out to everyone who registered when we post it with a link so that you'll be able to access it. For more information on the Paint, Body, and Equipment segment of the Auto Care Association, please email our staff liaison, Paul Fiore, at paul.fiore@autocare.org. We really appreciate your participation. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Melissa, for setting this up. And if you have any questions, send them to us and we'll address them after the fact. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.